35,000 feet above the freezing Rockies, civilian Flight 422 became a ghost ship. The pilots were utterly unconscious. The flight computer was degrading, and the Boeing 737 was drifting blindly toward jagged granite. The only hope was a passenger dead asleep in seat 7C and a frantic military radio call demanding her awakening. Captain Sarah Jenkins was drowning in the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that only a fighter pilot truly understands. For the last 6 months, she had been strapped into the cockpit of an F-35A Lightning II deployed out of Al-Dhafra Air Base, flying grueling combat air patrols that tested the absolute limits of human endurance. Pulling 9Gs took a toll on the spine, but it was the relentless mental hypervigilance that truly hollowed a person out. Now safely back stateside, all she wanted was to go home to Seattle. She was flying as a civilian tonight, seat 7C aisle on Transwest Airlines Flight 422, a Boeing 737-800 charter, operating a late-night red-eye from Denver to Seattle. She was dressed in civilian clothes, a faded gray hoodie pulled over her head, worn in jeans and heavy black boots. Her Bose noise-canceling headphones were firmly clamped over her ears, drowning out the low hum of the twin CFM56 turbofan engines. She didn't care about the complimentary beverage service. She didn't care about the in-flight movie. She closed her eyes before the plane even pushed back from the gate, surrendering to the heavy, dreamless sleep of a soldier off duty. Up front, behind a fortified, bullet-resistant Kevlar door, the flight deck was a sanctuary of dim lights and glowing glass displays. Captain Richard Hughes, a 20-year veteran of commercial aviation, was sipping a lukewarm black coffee. In the right seat, First Officer Greg Lindley was making a minor adjustment to the flight management computer. The autopilot was engaged in LN-AVE and V-on-AVE modes, tracking a GPS-guided highway in the sky over the desolate snow-capped peaks of the Idaho-Washington border. It was 1:14 a.m. The cabin behind them was dark, silent, and entirely asleep. Then a microscopic fault occurred. It started in the outflow valve, a small mechanical flap at the rear of the aircraft responsible for regulating cabin pressure. A corroded actuator missed during a routine maintenance cycle suddenly seized. Slowly, imperceptibly, the valve crept open, allowing the pressurized air inside the fuselage to vent out into the freezing, thin atmosphere of 35,000 feet. In an explosive decompression, the sheer violence of the event instantly alerts the crew. The temperature plummets, a loud bang echoes through the cabin, and oxygen masks drop immediately. But this was a slow decompression, the most insidious and lethal failure an aircraft can suffer. It was a silent thief of oxygen. On the overhead panel, the cabin altitude warning light flickered on. A master caution chime sounded in the cockpit, a sharp ding-ding. Captain Hughes blinked, staring at the illuminated amber light. Hypoxia, oxygen starvation, does not feel like suffocating. It feels like a warm, heavy blanket of intoxication. It breeds confusion, euphoria, and an overwhelming lethargy. "We got a light," Greg slurred slightly, his hand reaching sluggishly toward the pressurization panel. First Officer Lindley frowned, staring at the display. His brain, already starved of oxygen, could not process the warning. It's just a sensor glitch, Rick. Let me reset." He reached for the switch, but his hand missed it by 2 inches. He chuckled, a soft, drunken sound. "Missed it." "Put your mask on," Hughes whispered, but the command lacked any urgency. He didn't reach for his own quick-donning oxygen mask, stowed just to his left. The brain needs oxygen to recognize that it needs oxygen. Within 60 seconds, Lindley's head slumped forward against the yoke. Hughes leaned back in his seat, his eyes fluttering shut as if he were settling in for a comfortable nap. The cockpit fell dead silent, save for the rhythmic automated hum of the avionics cooling fans. Flight 422 was now a 150,000-pound missile flying at 500 miles per hour, commanded by a computer and crewed by ghosts. Down on the ground, inside the dark, cavernous room of the Seattle Air Route Traffic Control Center, a veteran controller named Martin Vance was monitoring the high-altitude sector. His eyes scanned the green radar returns gliding across his scope. Transwest 422, Seattle Center, contact Spokane approach on 133.45, Martin said into his headset. Transwest 422, Seattle Center, radio check. Nothing. Martin frowned and zoomed in on the data block attached to the target. Altitude FL 350, 35,000 feet, speed 440 knots. But then he noticed something chilling. The data block ticked. The altitude read 348, then 34 something. The plane was descending without a crew to monitor it. A cascading failure in the aircraft's pedostatic system, caused by icing that the unconscious pilots hadn't activated the heaters for, had disconnected the VNAV autopilot. The aircraft was now in a shallow, uncommanded descent, dropping at a rate of 1,000 feet per minute, right into the jagged teeth of the Cascade Mountains. Trans-West 422, if you hear this transmission. Squawk, Martin demanded, the relaxed demeanor entirely gone from his voice. The radar return continued its slow, fatal dive. Martin slammed his hand onto a red button on his console, patching directly into the domestic events network. Den, I have a Nordo, no radio aircraft descending uncommanded over the Cascades. Possible hypoxia event. We need a military intercept right now. Over the Cascade Mountains, the weather was rapidly deteriorating. A heavy localized blizzard was rolling over the peaks, cloaking the jagged granite in a wall of impenetrable white. Flying directly beneath the cloud deck, hugging the valleys at 12,000 feet, were two UH-60M Black Hawk helicopters belonging to the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, returning from a classified mountain terrain training exercise. Call signs, Dust-Off 1 and Dust-Off 2. Chief Warrant Officer David Huck Miller gripped the cyclic of his Black Hawk. His night vision goggles cast the world in an eerie synthetic green glow. Suddenly, his radio cracked to life with a priority override from NORAD's Western Air Defense Sector. Dust-Off 1, this is Huntress on guard. We have a critical situation in your airspace. Commercial 737, Trans-West 422, unresponsive and descending rapidly. Fighter intercept from Portland is 20 minutes out, but the track shows the aircraft will impact terrain in less than 12. They are descending directly into your altitude block. Huck felt a cold shot of adrenaline hit his stomach. Huntress, Dust-Off 1, we have no intercept capability for a jet airliner. We max out at 150 knots. Dust-Off 1, we don't need you to shoot it down. We need you to look at it. He's passing through 15,000 feet, drifting right into your flight path. Be advised, we have cross-referenced the flight's passenger manifest with the DoD database. We have an active duty Air Force pilot on board, Captain Sarah Jenkins, F-35 pilot. She is in seat 7C, but the cabin didn't depressurize fast enough to automatically drop the masks. The passengers are likely deeply asleep or succumbing to hypoxia. The pilots are out. Understood, Huck said, his mind racing. How do we wake her up? Seattle Center is trying to hack the plane's SESCOM system to ring the cockpit, but if the pilots are out, it's useless. Dust-Off, if you can get visual, we are routing the airline's emergency dispatch frequency through your comms. You need to connect to the cabin interphone system. Wake up anyone who can hear you. Through the snow and the darkness, Huck's co-pilot pointed frantically out the right side of the canopy. There, 2 o'clock high, emerging from the cloud layer, massive and terrifyingly silent, was the Boeing 737. It was dropping like a stone in slow motion, its landing lights off, just a ghostly silhouette of aluminum slicing through the snowy night. It was descending through 13,000 feet, rapidly entering the breathable atmosphere, but heading straight for Mount Rainier's unforgiving foothills. I have visual, Huck shouted over the roar of the Black Hawk's rotors, banking hard to parallel the descending behemoth. The sheer speed differential meant the 737 would blow past them in seconds. Huntress, patch me through to that cabin interphone right now. Inside the 737, the cabin was a tomb. The air was thin, cold and stale. Passengers were slumped against windows and tray tables, trapped in a hypoxic slumber that for many was on the verge of becoming permanent. Because the plane was now descending through 12,000 feet, the ambient oxygen was slowly increasing, but not fast enough to wake a cabin full of deeply unconscious civilians. At the forward galley, Flight Attendant Brenda Clark was slumped against the beverage cart. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, jagged gasps. Her head throbbed with a blinding, agonizing pain, the first brutal symptom of rapid oxygen returning to a starved brain. Suddenly, a harsh, piercing electronic ring shattered the silence of the galley. It was the wall-mounted red interphone, the emergency line from the ground. Brenda groaned, her eyelids fluttering. She felt nauseous, her limbs heavy as lead. The phone kept screaming. With agonizing slowness, she reached up, her trembling fingers wrapping around the receiver. She pulled it to her ear. "Hello," she gasped. Instead of the airline's dispatcher, a harsh, clipped military voice roared through the earpiece. "Flight attendant, listen to me very carefully. This is Chief Miller, U.S. Army Aviation. Your aircraft is in a fatal descent. Your pilots are unconscious. You are going to crash in less than 9 minutes." Brenda's eyes shot wide open, the sheer terror acting like a defibrillator to her hypoxic brain. She looked out the small porthole window in the galley door. The moonlight illuminated the terrifyingly close, jagged peaks of the Cascade Range. They were flying so low she could see the snow on the pine trees. "Oh my God," she choked out. "Oh my God, the masks didn't drop. Everyone is asleep." "Do not panic. Do exactly as I say," Huck's voice barked with commanding authority. "There is an Air Force fighter pilot on your manifest. Her name is Jenkins. She is in seat 7C. Drop the phone, go to seat 7C, and wake her up. Now, do it, or you will die." Brenda dropped the receiver. It dangled by its coiled cord, swinging violently as the 737 hit a pocket of severe mountain turbulence. The plane shuddered, groaning under the aerodynamic stress of its uncommanded dive. Brenda stumbled into the aisle, gripping the overhead bins to stay upright. The cabin was pitch black, illuminated only by the floor path lighting. Passengers were swaying like ragdolls. "Row 7, she muttered, her breath turning to mist in the freezing cabin. "Row 7, 7C, she found it. The woman in the aisle seat had a gray hoodie pulled up, large headphones over her ears, her arms crossed tight over her chest. Brenda lunged forward, grabbing Sarah by the shoulders, and shook her with the desperate strength of a dying woman. "Wake up, please, you have to wake up." Sarah Jenkins did not wake up slowly. Military training had conditioned her to go from deep sleep to combat readiness in a matter of seconds. Her eyes snapped open, sharp and alert. Instantly, her inner ear recognized the subtle, terrifying pitch of the aircraft. They were nose down. The engines were spooled back. The air pressure was entirely wrong. She ripped her headphones off. "What's happening?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the dark cabin. "The military," Brenda sobbed, pointing wildly toward the dangling phone in the galley. "They called. The pilots are passed out. We're crashing. They said you're a pilot." Sarah didn't ask questions. She unbuckled her seatbelt and vaulted into the aisle, her mind instantly shifting into an icy, calculating state. She sprinted to the forward galley, snatched the swinging phone receiver, and pressed it to her ear. "This is Captain Jenkins, USAF. Who am I speaking to?" "Captain, this is Chief Miller, Vanguard 6, Army Aviation. I'm flying a Black Hawk parallel to your descent, currently 10 miles behind you and losing ground fast. Your aircraft suffered a slow depressurization. Your flight crew is completely incapacitated. You are at 10,000 feet, descending at 1,500 feet per minute. You have approximately 6 minutes until you impact the eastern ridge of Mount Rainier." Sarah stared at the reinforced cockpit door. "Is the autopilot on?" "We believe VNAV disconnected due to pitot icing. The plane is trimmed down." "Captain, you need to get into that cockpit and pull that plane up." Sarah stared at the heavy Kevlar door. Post 9/11 security regulations meant that door was designed to withstand small arms fire and the brute force of a breaching ram. It was electronically locked from the inside. "Chief," Sarah said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "The door is locked. The crew is out. Tell NORAD. Tell them I can't get in." "Captain," Miller's voice cracked with grim finality over the radio. "You have to find a way. Break it down. Override it. I don't care how you do it. If you don't get into that flight deck in the next 4 minutes, everyone on that plane is going to die." Sarah dropped the phone. She turned to look at the reinforced door, the impenetrable barrier standing between 150 sleeping souls and a mountain of solid rock. Sarah stood before the imposing reinforced Kevlar surface of the flight deck door, her mind operating with the hyper-focused, icy clarity that had kept her alive in hostile airspace. The Boeing 737 was plummeting out of the night sky, completely blind to the lethal granite terrain rushing up to meet it in the darkness. The aircraft shuddered violently, protesting the extreme aerodynamic forces of its uncommanded descent, the metal skin groaning under the strain. She turned her sharp, intense gaze to Brenda Clark, the flight attendant, who was currently clinging to the galley counter, her face pale, slick with cold sweat, and utterly terrified. "The emergency access keypad," Sarah demanded, her voice cutting through the rising roar of the wind outside the fuselage. "There is a digital keypad for emergency entry. What is the access code? Give it to me right now." Brenda blinked slowly, her oxygen-starved brain struggling to process the frantic reality of the situation. Hypoxia had left her cognitive functions severely impaired, and the sudden rush of adrenaline was causing a paralyzing sensory overload. "I can't," Brenda stammered, her voice shaking violently. "It's a company procedure. Only the purser, the captain. The captain is currently unconscious and flying us into a mountain," Sarah barked, grabbing Brenda by both shoulders and pulling her close, forcing eye contact. Sarah channeled every ounce of her military command presence, projecting an aura of absolute authority. "Listen to me, Brenda. Look at my eyes. Breathe. You know this code. You learned it in recurrent training. It is the only thing keeping 150 innocent people alive right now. Tell me the numbers." Brenda gasped, a sudden ragged breath escaping her lungs as the heavy fog in her mind parted just enough. "3," she whispered, her trembling hand reaching up toward the small numerical pad embedded in the bulkhead next to the reinforced door. 3790 pound. Sarah didn't hesitate. She slammed her fingers into the firm rubber keys, inputting the digits with rapid, deliberate strikes. 3790 pound. A small LED indicator light, positioned directly above the keypad, immediately flashed from a dormant red to a blinking amber. A high-pitched rhythmic chime began to echo softly from the panel. Sarah grabbed the heavy metal handle and pulled with all her might. Nothing happened. The deadbolts remained firmly locked in place. The Kevlar door did not budge a single millimeter. "Why isn't it opening?" Sarah shouted, a spike of genuine fear finally piercing her disciplined composure. She rattled the handle violently. "I put the code in." "It's a delay timer," Brenda cried out, sliding down the galley wall until she was sitting on the freezing floor plates. "Post-hijacking security protocols. When the emergency code is entered, it sounds an alarm inside the cockpit. The pilots have 60 seconds to deny entry if they think there is a threat. If they are incapacitated and don't press the deny switch, the door unlocks automatically after 1 full minute." 60 seconds, Sarah repeated, her blood running cold as she looked out the small porthole window in the galley door. Through the localized blizzard raging outside, the thick cloud cover was beginning to break apart. Beneath the aircraft, the terrifying silhouette of the Cascade Mountains was becoming undeniably clear. Jagged, snow-covered pine trees were rapidly coming into focus, illuminated by the bright, pale light of the moon. They were so low to the ground that the sheer scale of the mountain ridges felt overwhelmingly massive. 60 seconds in an aircraft descending at over 1,000 feet per minute was an eternity. It was the difference between surviving a close call and impacting solid granite at 500 miles per hour. "We don't have 60 seconds, Sarah muttered, bracing her boots against the bulkhead as the Boeing 737 hit a massive pocket of turbulent mountain air. The aircraft dropped suddenly, a sickening sensation of weightlessness washing over the cabin behind them. The sudden, violent jolt of the severe turbulence finally began to awaken the deeply unconscious passengers. The increased oxygen concentration at this lower altitude, combined with the physical, violent shaking of the plane, dragged them back from the brink of hypoxic sleep. A cacophony of terror began to erupt behind the curtain. Confusion rapidly morphed into sheer, unadulterated panic as people realized they were trapped in a diving aircraft. Oxygen masks, which had finally deployed automatically as the aircraft descended, dangled uselessly from the overhead compartments, swinging violently like plastic pendulums. Children began to scream. A man in the front row was hyperventilating, gripping his armrests with white-knuckled intensity, his eyes wide with absolute horror. Sarah ignored the chaos. She pressed her ear directly against the cold, unyielding surface of the Kevlar door, straining to hear over the deafening roar of the slipstream and the screaming passengers behind her. Through the thick, bullet-resistant material, a muffled, synthesized, and utterly terrifying mechanical voice began to broadcast from the flight deck's ground proximity warning system. It was the most dreaded sound in all of commercial aviation, echoing with cold, automated finality. "Terrain, terrain, Pull up." "Come on," Sarah whispered through gritted teeth, her eyes locked onto the blinking amber light. "Come on, open the door." "Terrain, pull up." She began counting backward in her head. 15 seconds, 14, 13. The aircraft pitched down even further, the nose dipping dangerously low as the compromised autopilot systems completely lost their mechanical grip on the situation. The wind noise was becoming unbearable, a deafening shriek of air tearing across the aluminum fuselage. "Whoop, whoop, pull up! Whoop, whoop, pull up!" 3, 2, 1. With a loud, heavy mechanical clack, the electronic deadbolts retracted. The small LED indicator light above the keypad shifted from a blinking amber to a solid, brilliant green. Sarah grasped the handle, threw her entire body weight backward, and ripped the heavy reinforced door open. The flight deck was a chaotic, blinding nightmare of flashing crimson master warning lights, blaring klaxons, and the relentless screaming commands of the ground proximity warning system. The avionics displays glowed with a terrifying urgency, casting harsh synthetic shadows across the small enclosed space. Captain Richard Hughes and First Officer Greg Lindley were completely unresponsive. Lindley was slumped heavily forward, his upper body draped over the control column, his dead weight inadvertently pushing the control yoke forward, steepening the aircraft's fatal dive toward the earth. Hughes was leaning back in his seat, his head lolling to the side, his oxygen mask completely ignored and hanging limply by his left shoulder. "Brenda, get in here right now!" Sarah roared over the deafening noise of the alarms. "Get the first officer off the controls. Pull him back." Brenda stumbled into the cramped cockpit, her hands shaking violently. She grabbed the shoulders of the unconscious first officer, planting her feet firmly against the center pedestal, and hauled him backward with desperate, adrenaline-fueled strength. Lindley's heavy torso slumped back into his seat, freeing the right side control column from his oppressive weight. Sarah didn't bother trying to gently move Captain Hughes. Time had officially run out. She grabbed the collar of his uniform shirt, braced her heavy boots against the rudder pedals, and forcefully heaved the older man out of the left seat. Hughes collapsed onto the small, cramped floor space near the jump seat, completely oblivious to the chaos unfolding around him. Sarah threw herself into the left seat, instantly gripping the cold, contoured plastic of the captain's control yoke. Her eyes, trained by thousands of hours in supersonic fighter jets, immediately scanned the primary flight display, airspeed 460 knots and climbing rapidly, altitude 3,200 feet above sea level, vertical speed descending at an agonizing 2,800 feet per minute. Directly ahead of the cockpit windows, filling the entire windscreen with terrifying imminent destruction, was a massive, jagged wall of snow-covered granite. It was a secondary peak of the Mount Rainier foothills, and they were heading straight for the center of the rock face. "Whoop, whoop, pull up, terrain ahead, pull up!" Sarah's right thumb slammed aggressively into the small red autopilot disconnect button located on the side of the yoke. A loud, continuous cavalry charge alarm began to blare, signaling that the computer had completely relinquished control to the human pilot. The Boeing 737 was now entirely in her hands. She slammed her right hand forward onto the dual thrust levers, pushing them relentlessly past the detent and shoving them hard against the firewall. She demanded maximum takeoff/go-around thrust from the massive twin CFM56 turbofan engines hanging beneath the wings. "Spool up, damn it," Sarah hissed through clenched teeth. Jet engines are not instantaneous. They require agonizing, precious seconds to wind up and deliver their massive power. She gripped the yoke with both hands and pulled back with tremendous, unyielding force. The controls were incredibly heavy, fighting her at every millimeter as the aerodynamic pressures at this excessive speed resisted her aggressive inputs. The nose of the heavy airliner slowly, painfully, began to pitch upward. The sudden, extreme change in trajectory generated massive G-forces that ripped through the cabin. In the back, passengers were slammed violently deep into their seats, the structural limits of the Boeing aircraft groaning audibly under the severe, punishing stress of the desperate maneuver. "Give me more," Sarah grunted, her muscles burning as she hauled back on the yoke. The radar altimeter on her display began a horrifying rapid countdown as the mountain ridge rushed toward them. 1,000, 500, 400. The aircraft shuddered violently. The control column began to shake rapidly in her hands, the stick shaker warning. She was pulling the nose up so aggressively that the wings were on the absolute verge of an aerodynamic stall. If she pulled back any further, the plane would instantly lose all lift and drop like a stone. She had to ride the absolute edge of the aerodynamic envelope, balancing on a razor-thin wire between slamming into the mountain or stalling out and falling out of the sky. 300, 200, 100. Outside the cockpit windows, the massive pine trees blurring past were so incredibly close that Sarah could actually see the individual branches loaded with fresh snow. The belly of the massive aircraft scraped agonizingly through the uppermost canopy of the highest trees, tearing branches to shreds and sending a violent shudder rippling entirely through the aluminum fuselage. And then, miraculously, the world outside the windows transitioned from a solid wall of granite and trees to the vast, empty, beautiful black expanse of the open night sky. They had cleared the ridge by less than 80 feet. Sarah held the pitch, feeling the massive engines finally deliver their full roaring thrust, pushing the heavy aircraft safely upward into the clear, freezing air. High above them, banking sharply in his UH-60M Black Hawk helicopter, Chief Warrant Officer Huck Miller watched in absolute stunned silence. He had braced himself for the inevitable fiery explosion against the mountainside. Instead, he watched the massive ghostly silhouette of the Boeing 737 suddenly rear up like a massive silver leviathan, violently scraping the very top of the mountain ridge before clawing its way back into the heavens. Huck keyed his radio, his voice trembling slightly with pure, unadulterated relief. "Huntress, dust off 1, you are not going to believe this. The Heavy is climbing. I repeat, the 737 is climbing. She actually pulled it off." Inside the cockpit of Flight 422, the frantic alarms finally fell silent as the aircraft achieved a safe altitude and a positive rate of climb. Sarah Jenkins let out a long, ragged breath, her hands still gripping the control yoke with white-knuckled intensity. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She reached up with a trembling hand, retrieved the pilot's heavy communications headset from the hook, and slipped it over her ears. She keyed the microphone switch on the yoke. "Seattle Center, this is Transwest 422, Sarah said, her voice eerily calm and professional despite the sheer terror of the last 10 minutes. "Captain is incapacitated. First officer is incapacitated. I am an off-duty military pilot currently in command of this aircraft. We have successfully cleared terrain and are holding steady at 8,000 feet. Declare a full airborne emergency. I am going to need an immediate vector to your longest available runway." A brief, stunned silence echoed over the airwaves before the seasoned controller responded, his voice filled with profound awe. "Transwest 422, Seattle Center. We read you loud and clear, Captain. Turn right, heading 030. Welcome back to the sky. Let's get you folks home." Did this unbelievable true story of Captain Sarah Jenkins and Flight 422 leave you on the absolute edge of your seat? The courage to act when seconds separate life from death is truly extraordinary. If you love this dramatic aviation rescue, hit that like button right now. Please don't forget to share this incredible video with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more heart-stopping real-life survival stories. Ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload.